Welcome, everyone, and thanks so much for tuning in. My goal here today is to reflect a little bit on the lessons that I've learned through these two chapters that I've experienced as an athlete. First, as an Olympic rower in my 20s, and then as a world championship triathlete in my 50s and 40s and 50s. And to talk a little bit about how those lessons have really informed the way that I look at making choices and navigating my way through life. And the goal here, of course, is that all of you find something relevant to take away that might offer you a different way of looking at things, especially right now in this strangest of chapters that we're living through. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. There we go. All right, great. So let me give you a little bit of background about myself just to get started here. So I grew up in New England, born and raised in New England, come from a very close family, have an older brother, younger sister. I'm first generation American. My parents are from Great Britain and South Africa. And growing up, the American dream was very much alive and well. Brought up with the idea that if you work hard, you have an opinion, and you try to be good at a lot of different things, sort of embracing that Renaissance man mentality, then good things will come to you. So for me, sports was always a focus. I played everything. I loved everything. I competed at everything. And by the time I got to high school, I was very focused on field hockey, basketball, and rowing. And I started rowing my freshman year in high school as a ninth grader. And I knew before I even touched an oar that I would love it, because it seemed to me that the harder you worked, the faster you got. And that very much appealed to me given everything that I'd learned growing up. So after high school, I went off to Harvard. I was totally intimidated. Even though there were 23 kids from my high school graduating class who went that year, I still felt like I was the mistake the admissions committee made. And as one of only two Anglos and two athletes, frankly, majoring in Chinese, my confidence was hardly boosted academically. But at Harvard, I discovered Radcliffe Crew. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit, and how that really informed my entire college experience and everything that came after. During my junior and senior year at Harvard, I rowed on the Olympic team. But I wasn't just a rower, and that was really important to me. I also played field hockey. I walked onto the varsity my freshman year. I played intramural basketball throughout because it was important to me to be an athlete and not just a rower. So after college came the nonprofit chapter. I started a nonprofit in South Africa called SCORE. I worked for World Teach and started and taught at English programs all around Africa. I ran nonprofit or community programs at Nike. I worked for Mercy Corps in North Korea. I worked for Friends of the Children, both in Portland and starting their chapter in Boston. But throughout all of this, really the biggest focus was being a mom. As my husband's career took off, I was in and out of the workforce. It was very opportunistic, frankly. But particularly as the kids hit elementary school, it became really clear that the best place for our family was to have me at home. I think that, being a mom, as anybody who is a parent knows, is easily the hardest job ever. I don't think there exists such a visceral, emotional roller coaster that's equivalent to parenting. I've certainly never been so elated as I have when my son or one of my sons has won a hard-fought battle. And certainly no one besides my son has reduced me to hiding in the closet, sobbing behind a row of overcoats and feeling like my heart would break. So I was at home a lot with the boys, and that was awesome. I wouldn't pass that up for a second. And as we followed my husband's career around the world, one of our stops was in Amsterdam. There as a trailing spouse, I didn't work. I started to row again. I joined a Dutch rowing club. I also learned Dutch. I kept a very well-read blog. I worked as sort of an impromptu travel agent. I taught English. We traveled to 24 countries in 24 months. We really milked the time that we had over there, and it was an amazing experience. And the last thing that I did there was I was the one non-Dutch member of the organizing committee that brought the World Championships for rowing to Amsterdam in 2014. And as such, I was asked to announce the opening ceremonies because the Dutch felt that as the one Native American speaker or the native English speaker, I should have that job. So that was a real kick and a great way to end our time there. When I came back from Amsterdam, the kids were a little bit older. I wanted to get back into the workforce. I didn't necessarily want to go back into nonprofit, so I launched a career as a project manager and had a great couple of stints, first at Zoom Care and then at Infinity Images. But really the biggest thing coming back from Amsterdam was that I had been reconnected with rowing over in the Netherlands, and I remembered how much I loved to train and loved to race, and particularly how much I loved to be part of a community of women all focused towards a similar goal. So when I came back from the Netherlands, I needed to find something to replace that. So I started racing triathlon. And pretty quickly, I fell in love with it, as a lot of people do. And I got into coaching. I launched a high performance team training environment for a group called the Bat Women in Oregon, which are some really rock star female triathletes. I started coaching at Life Sport, and we're about to roll out a new initiative at Life Sport, which focuses on the same idea of women working together, called Amelia's Army. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. So that's a little bit about me. But what I really like to talk about today is not me, but the lessons that I have learned through this experience. It really comes down to 3 golden rules. Number 1, dream big. Dream the biggest dream you can, but make sure you put foundations under those castles in the sky. Number 2, build your boathouse. We'll talk about this. It's really about building your community, because harder things are done easier when you do them together. And number 3, when life gives you lemons, you better make lemonade. Or in the time of COVID, lemon drop martinis. You've got to aggressively seek the silver lining that's always out there. Okay, let's go back to 1985, 1986. I'm a freshman, sophomore at Harvard, majoring in Chinese. I keep holding down a part-time job. And for the first time, it begins to occur to me that I might have a chance to make the Olympic team in 1988. But this is this huge goal. I'm too small, I'm too young, I'm too inexperienced, I'm 2 years younger than everybody else trying out for the Olympic team. And it's almost overwhelming how big this goal is. So as I think about this goal, I start to break it down into pieces. And this is a key message here. What did I have to be good at to make the Olympic team? Well, for rowing, it's very much similar to triathlon. You have to have raw strength, power, strength. That's number 1. Number 2, I had to have aerobic fitness. Number 3, I had to have good technique on the water. And number 4 was mental toughness. Those are kind of the 4 buckets that make up a really good rower. But of those 4, I could really only see 2 where I could win. I was never going to be as big and strong as everybody else. I just didn't have the genetics. And all of these other women had spent so much more time on the water than I had, that they had had more time to refine their technique. And I could work on it, and for sure I would, but I just didn't have the same hours on the water as everybody else. So that means I had to win at aerobic fitness and at mental toughness. And so that's what I focused on. But still, this goal is so big. Mentally, how would I navigate my way through these months of training to get to where I needed to be? Well, so this is how I broke it down into pieces. Every night for 2.5 years leading up into the Olympics, I would think in terms of 3 time horizons. First of all, I would think about what was right in front of me the next day. Maybe it was a workout, maybe it was on the water, maybe it was a strength workout, maybe it was running or doing stadiums, but whatever was right in front of me the next day, I would focus on executing that task to perfection. And I would look at it 2 ways. I would think of myself in the space, like how my body would feel as I was going through that workout. And then I would look at myself from above, like a drone shot, and look down at myself executing this workout, either by myself or with a team of women, and really hitting it, really getting it right. The second thing I would look at, the second time horizon, is I'd look down the road a little bit. What's coming in about a month's time? What test, what important milestone or event, what yardstick is coming that I need to excel at? Maybe it would be a national team test. Maybe it was an intercollegiate rowing race. Maybe it was a camp or a series of seat races or something fairly important that was coming within about a month. And same thing, I would feel myself doing that task to the very best of my abilities. I would look down on myself achieving this task. I would have really positive mental self-talk throughout this. I would feel confident and strong and intentional. And then the third thing I would think about every single night is I would mentally rehearse what it was like, what it would feel like to walk into the opening ceremonies on September 25th at the Olympic Games in Seoul, South Korea. And I let myself just for a couple minutes every night smell it and hear it and feel it, who I would be surrounded by and what it would sound like when I walked onto the track of those opening ceremonies in front of 100,000 people. And that's how I would fall asleep every single night for about 500 nights before the Olympics. But this takes time. It takes guts. It takes courage to allow yourself to think about that great big goal. And so you break it down into those 3 time horizons. And that's how you make this huge goal feel a little bit more approachable. Okay, let's fast forward 30 years. It's now end of 2016, beginning of 2017. I'm big into triathlon. I'm really excited about it, but I'm still fairly new to the sport. I've never been to World Championships, but I feel like I can win the World Championships. I feel like it's within reach, even though I've never been there. So same thing, broke it down into pieces. What do I have to be good at? Well, I have to have the fastest 5K of my life. Now, let me explain for a second that this particular race, this World Championship sprint length, in this case, duathlon, is a 5K run, a 20K bike, and then a 2.5K run. And this particular type of triathlon is draft legal, which means you can use the bike pack to your advantage and save energy by working in a pack. And that's pretty unusual for triathlons. Usually you're not allowed to draft. It's more of a time trial. But in this particular race, that's legal. So I have to have the fastest 5K of my life in that first run, because I have to come into transition 1 when we get on our bikes with the lead women so that we can work together on the bike pack. So fast 5K. Number 2, I have to be able to control that bike pack. I couldn't sit back and assume that someone else was going to have the experience or the courage to organize and to lead that bike pack. So I had to know how to do that. And I didn't at the end of 2016. I had never done any draft legal racing. Number 3, I had to own the transitions. A triathlon, the total time of a triathlon runs from when the starting gun goes off to when you cross the finish line. And there's 2 transitions in there, from run to bike and bike to run. And those count in your overall time. And I knew that I could grab valuable seconds in this race if I could get those transitions well. And I knew, or I was making the assumption, that women my age were not going to try some fairly high-risk tactics like jumping onto your bike or unbuckling your shoes before you get off the bike and leaping off the bike and keeping everything flowing rather than getting off your bike, taking off your shoes, et cetera, in a more slow progression. So I had to learn how to do that so that I could pick up those seconds in transition 1 and in transition 2. Number 4, I had to know the competition. I had to know who to look out for out there. Turns out they were all British. And finally, I had to mentally dominate the race. I had to stand in the starting chute, absolutely believing that no one was going to be tougher out there for that hour and 10 minutes, hour and 15 minutes than I was going to be. So I had to start to assemble my mental toolkit so that when I got out there and everything was exploding and all I wanted to do was stop, I was going to be able to have the wherewithal, better than the next woman, to keep pushing through to win the race. Okay, but still, this goal is really big. How do I get there? Now I know what I have to be good at, but how do I get there? Well, number 1, put those goals right out in front of you on sticky notes so that you have to see them every single day. I'll show you a picture on the next slide. I had sticky notes with interim milestones that I had to meet above my computer. I had to stare at them every single day. I knew what the steps were to get to win the World Championships. Number 2, find the right coach. If you want to be a world champion, find a world-class coach. And I found that coach in Lance Watson, who runs the company that I now work for. And he did. He never failed me. He got me. He knew exactly what to do to get me there. I followed the plan and ended up on the top step of the podium. Number 3, I had to execute every day's workouts to the very best of my ability. There would be no off days. You know, it's funny. I often think about when rowers get into triathlon, it's very obvious because rowers aren't really allowed to have a bad day. When you think about it, you're going out in a team boat, right? You're going out in a boat at an 8 or a 4, and that boat is out there all together. And no one ever asks, hey, Juliet, how are you feeling today? They ask how the boat is going, but they'll never ask you as an individual. If you have a bad day, the boat has a bad day. If you want to go in because you just kind of want to mail it in, you want to be done, you're tired, you know, maybe you didn't sleep well the night before, or if you go in, the whole boat goes in. So there's this mentality that you finish the workout no matter what. And if you're indoors doing an indoor workout as a rower and you've got a lineup of 20 or 30 ergs and you decide you're not having a good day and you stand up and bail on that erg workout, everybody sees you. And who's going to trust you to be in their boat when the shit really hits the fan if you're standing up and bailing on an erg workout? So that was the mentality that I carried into my triathlon workouts in 2017, that every workout had to be good. And I was going to hit every workout and there weren't going to be any excuses. And I did. I remember there was one workout in that 9 months leading up into the World Championships. There was one run workout that I didn't hit, and I still remember it, but the other ones were pretty well dialed in. How else do I get there? Well, I had to acquire new skills. I had to learn how to draft legal bike race. I had to learn how to descend and corner. This particular race course had a screaming downhill into a traffic circle at the bottom where you went 3/4 of the way around before shooting off in another direction. And I had to learn how to do those transitions. And so I did. I spent that spring racing here in Oregon, getting into every single bike race I could so I could learn how to be part of a pack and how to control that pack. I did a lot of hill climbing and descending. And I watched a lot of YouTube videos on how to do flying mounts. And I took my bike over to the track and I learned first how to do it on the AstroTurf so that when I fell, which I did, it wouldn't hurt very much. And then I did it on the track. And then I finally had the guts to do it on asphalt. And then I could do them 10 perfectly in a row, 20 perfectly in a row. And I knew when I got to the point where I could do 20 in a row perfectly, I could do it under pressure at the World Championships. So those are the new skills that I had to acquire to get to the starting line in this race. Next, I had to do research. When you think about this race, you want to be running with someone your speed or even a little bit faster to pull you into transition, that first transition, so that you can be on that front bike pack. So I combed through the results of the last 3 to 5 national championships of women my age, a little bit younger, a little bit older. And then I also combed through all the results of the World Championships to find the woman who was a little bit faster than me in 5K and who was either my ability on the bike, I'm a pretty good cyclist, or maybe a little bit better, who I could work with on the bike pack. And I found her. Her name is Sarah Barber. She lives in Boise. She's 10 years younger than I am. And so once I figured out who the woman was, I stalked her over Facebook, reached out to her about a month before the race, and we started to talk about, you know, how this race might play out and how we might work together. So once I had Sarah kind of in my corner and I was clearly in hers, the last thing I had to do was to mentally prepare. So for the month before the World Championships, same thing as in the Olympics 30 years before, every night I would play that race through in my head and I would think about Sarah Barber's hip. Because I knew that my whole world for that sub 20 minutes was going to be Sarah Barber's hip. And if I could stay on that hip, she would pull me into transition 1 and then we'd be able to work together on the bike. So as you can see in these photographs, top right-hand photo, you can see me at the back there. The woman right in front of me in sunglasses is Sarah Barber. That's the beginning of the race. And you can see our British competitors, the ones I had to beat, right at the front. Those 2 women, Phillips and Hall, came in 2nd and 3rd. And the bottom right-hand corner, you can see me hanging on for dear life to Sarah Barber's hip. This is about 500 meters before we roll into transition where we hop on our bikes. And I was, I was barely hanging on, but it worked. And I ran the fastest 5K of my life. I ran a first mile in 6:07 and I averaged 6:17s for the 5K. I'm 50, but that's exactly what I needed to do to win that world championships. So for both of these races, the process was the same. You've got to break down that goal into intentional pieces. This is an intentional process. And you have to mentally rehearse success and allow yourself the time to see that big goal. So figure out what you have to be good at, and then break it down into pieces and chase those pieces one by one. Okay, so how do we apply this to the real world? How do we put it into practice in our lives? Let me give you a couple of examples. So after college, I didn't want to sit in a boat and go backwards anymore. So I headed to South Africa and I started to work in one of the black townships there. There's a black township called Kailicha. This is before Mandela was let out of jail. Apartheid was very much still the rule of the land. Things were beginning to crumble. And in this township of 1 million black South Africans, I was one of only a handful of whites who went in every day to work. The others were the police and the Xerox repairman. And as I started to work in this elementary school, I basically walked into the elementary school and said, what can I do to help? And they took one look at me and said, could you please take the kids for PE? Because it's mandated by the government that the kids go for PE, but we don't have a PE teacher. So they're all just sitting in their classrooms during their PE period. Well, that was easy. So I started taking the kids outside one by one, classroom by classroom for PE. It was immediately apparent the kids didn't have shoes. There were absolutely no athletic uniforms. There was no equipment. The field I had to work with was basically a garbage and rock and glass strewn sand pitch. So how do you bring an athletic program to an impoverished black South African township? Well, I needed uniforms and equipment. I needed money. And I needed if I wanted to make this something bigger than just myself, I needed to recruit other young people, as idealistic and energetic as I was, to come to South Africa to help me. So I started this organization, SCORE. I wrote to all of the prep schools that I had come up being associated with by going to one of them back in New England. And I said, I know you have closets full of old uniforms that your students are not using anymore, but you can't give them to the landfill because you don't want anybody else running around in Exeter or Andover uniforms. So send me your old uniforms, send me those soccer balls that you've only used for one season, put them in a box, send them to South Africa. They can be well used here, and they're 7,000 miles away from where you are. Number two, I leveraged all of my father's business contacts. I had one dress, it was blue with black shoes, and I had this list of contacts from my father. He at the time was the chairman of a company in Europe, but had met people doing business all over the world. And I went around South Africa, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Durban, Pretoria, marching in and out of mostly white males' offices, telling them about this project and convincing them to give money for this new initiative that we were running. My dad got me in the door. I had to sell them on the project. And number three, I had to one by one, via phone calls and email, convince the parents, very concerned and rightfully concerned parents of college students, that they should allow their student, their child, this responsibility and this opportunity to come to South Africa to work in Kailicha, which was at that point dubbed the murder capital of the world by the New York Times, to work with me in South Africa. And remember, I was only 1 or 2 years older than these kids, we're all kids at the time, but somehow the power of idealism and conviction allowed these volunteers to come over and work for 6 months at a time on this project in South Africa. And I'm really proud to say that this initiative, SCORE, continues to exist 30 years later. It works all over Southern Africa, providing athletic opportunities for young people, training people to become coaches. The guy who took it over from me has absolutely blown it up, and I'm really proud of him too. So it still exists. It's a good idea someone else took to fruition. Okay, let me give you another example. It's 1999, and there's a huge famine in North Korea. Of the 22 million people living in North Korea, 4 million starved to death between 1996 and 1999. So we have this enormous problem of how do you get food to starving North Koreans? The United States and most countries in the world do not have official relations with North Korea. There's no way to get food there. But North Korean famine refugees are running across the frozen Tumen River, which is the border between North Korea and China, every night, all winter long, to go into China to look for food, to take it back into North Korea for their families. So how do we get them food? Well, we need the food, locally resourced if possible. We need a network through which we can distribute it, and we need money. Those are the three pieces we need. So we work with South Korean churches here in the United States, of which there is a vast and fairly well-resourced network of South Korean American churches, essentially, and we ask them to give money. We work with a series of underground churches on the North Korean-Chinese border that exist. These are very much like Harriet Tubman Underground Railroad. The Chinese refuse to recognize them. They don't want to have anything to do with institutionalized religion in the late 1990s. But these little churches exist in people's houses. They're just one room, but they're all along the border there. So we match these underground Christian churches with these South Korean American churches. And that becomes our distribution network. The North Korean famine refugees come across, they find these little enclaves, and then in those enclaves, we have stacked and ready to go burlap sacks, locally resourced on the Chinese side, which have been made into backpacks. Essentially, they've got shoulder straps, and they weigh about 50 pounds, and they've got enough food for a month for a family of 4 to take back to North Korea. So these people were coming over, being shot at by their own border guards. They'd find these churches, they'd pick up these food packs, and sometimes on the very same night, they would turn around and go back. And that is courage that I will never know. But that's how we solved that problem to the best of our abilities. That's how we were able to help during that time. Okay, third example. I'm going to skip the Stanford one because we don't have time. But third example. So I come back from Amsterdam. I want to get into a different type of career. I don't really want to go back into nonprofit. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. And my husband says, why don't you be a project manager? You're organized. You like leading teams. You like working with people. You like getting shit done. Why don't you be a project manager? And I said, what's a project manager? So I Google project manager. I think, okay, well, this is sort of what I do. And running, the COO of Hochman family operations, I can do this. And so the question is, the challenge is, how do I convince employers that my skill set, my nonprofit skill set, is relevant to being a project manager in their corporation? So I break it down into pieces. First of all, I reconstruct my resume using all of that great nonprofit experience, which was basically the same thing: starting programs, bringing programs to fruition, setting goals, breaking the goals up into little pieces, setting interim milestones, taking that NGO experience and putting it into project management language. And I literally had a list of terms that I was trying to litter all throughout my resume to make it look official. So I threw my resume out to a bunch of different companies. I get an interview at Zoom Healthcare in Portland. And the night before the live interview, I had a screening interview first. The night before the live interview, I get a call from one of the 2 interviewers. And she says, could you please, when you come tomorrow, bring a project plan that shows how you would open a new healthcare clinic? Well, a project plan? What the heck is a project plan? I had no idea what a project plan was. What was this person expecting? So I said to my husband, you know what, I should just cancel the interview. I don't know what they're talking about. It's going to be a waste of their time. It's going to be a waste of my time. I'm going to be laughed out of the room. And my husband said, wait a second. I think you're just getting a little overwhelmed by the language. And he goes through all of his Nike slides, because at the time he was in operations at Nike, and Nike people have a lot of slides. So he goes through all of his slides, and he pulls up one slide and he says, look, this is a 1-page overview of how we would build a new distribution center and the timeline it would take to build a new distribution center. And I said, oh, thank you, honey. Can you print that for me? So he prints it off for me. He goes off to work the next day. I get up, I sit down at my desk at 10 o'clock. My interview's at 1. I look at this Nike distribution center overview. And I think, okay, I'm building a healthcare clinic. And so with my pencil and paper, because I don't know how to use PowerPoint, because in the nonprofit world, we didn't have to use PowerPoint, I draw a project plan. And that's what you can see in the top right-hand corner of this slide. Notice how straight my lines are, because I used a ruler and a pencil so that I could erase if I made a mistake. And I map out the 6-month project, the 6-month, 9-month process to open a new healthcare clinic, including construction, staffing, equipment, meds, looking into government regulations, etc. I just mapped it all out, sort of common sense as far as I was concerned. And then with just enough time, I put on my big girl clothes and I went out to Hillsborough, where Zoom was based at the time. And I teetered on those high heels into the conference room. And as I got to the conference room, there were these 2 young, incredibly efficient, intelligent women ready to interview me. And I slapped my project plan down on the table and slid it across to them. And they picked it up and looked at it and said, oh, we've never seen one quite like this before. But it was the same idea as getting ready for the Olympic team or getting ready for the World Championships. It was set a big goal, break it down into pieces, and knock those goals off one by one. So I walked them through it. I got the job. I had an amazing couple of years at Zoom working with these same 2 women who interviewed me. So classic process by which you apply the same idea of figuring out what you need to be good at, breaking it down into pieces, and then knocking off those goals one by one. Okay, we're going to move on to the next topic. Golden rule number 2, build your boathouse. Now let me talk for a minute about what I mean by boathouse. When I got to Harvard, I felt really lost. I felt very overwhelmed academically. I was socially kind of maladroit. But when I walked into that boathouse every day, here was this squad of strong, opinionated, fearless women who took me under their wing and judged me only on the basis of how hard I was willing to work to make their boats go fast. Now, this isn't always easy. I didn't always get it right. I was thrown in the Charles. I was rolled down the stairs in a garbage can. I had water thrown at me any number of times. And I totally deserved it, I'm sure. But I knew that I was valued. I knew that the harder I worked, the more I gave to that team, the faster I could make those boats go, that I was part of that community. Now, here's the thing about rowing. Rowing is hard, right? But the resilience that you learn in the boathouse carries over to life. There's very little as physically difficult as a 2K erg test or a 6-minute race. It takes about 6 minutes for a women's 8 to get through a 2,000-meter race. But that race, you are anaerobic the entire time. You pop off the line, your heart rate immediately goes to over 200 if you're in your early 20s. You progress your way through the race, you're hanging on for dear life. You get to the end, you can't do anything. Your heart is going so loud, it's making your eardrums burst. Your lungs are exploding. All you can do to hang on to the woman in front of you. And in that moment, honestly, towards the end of the race, you can't even see anything. All you've got is this little pinpoint of light. And the only thing that's working is your ears, and you're listening to every single thing that coxswain said. It is a 6-minute rowing race is tough, but life is tough. So the benefit of the boathouse is you've got these people who are they're all different. They're from all different walks of life, all different backgrounds, but they're united by a single goal. And it's that shared experience of working towards that goal that unites you to that community. So the 2 guys who started Strava, Michael and Mark, they were actually Harvard lightweight rowers. And they'll tell you that one of the ideas, the big idea behind Strava, was that they wanted to recreate what they had in the boathouse. You go down to the boathouse, you see the workout, you worry about the workout, you talk about the workout, you do the workout, you finish the workout, you talk about the workout, you go back to the dorms, everybody goes to dinner together, you still talk about the workout. When you think about it, that's what Strava is. It's everybody online just talking about their workouts and that shared experience of training together. But the interesting thing about rowing is you've got this tension, even though you've got this sort of common umbrella of the shared experience, you've got this ongoing tension between individual and team. Because throughout a lot of the year, you're actually competing against the other women to try to make the best boat that you can when it comes to spring racing season. But you want those other women to be the best athletes that they can be, even though you're competing against them, because when it comes time to form up boats, you want the fastest 8 women together making that boat go fast. So while at the same time you're trying to beat these other women, you want them to be fast. So it's this interesting kind of tension that goes on in the sport of rowing. But in that boathouse, it's this place where everybody knows your name. It doesn't matter who you are. Everybody belongs, whether you're the least experienced novice or the most accomplished ex-Olympian varsity athlete. Everyone's in there together trying to make boats go fast. So why is this important? There's a TED talk by a guy named Johann Hori, and he talks about how humans are pack animals. He says prehistoric man wasn't necessarily the fastest or the strongest on the African savanna, but we were able to take down mammals much bigger or faster than we were because we banded together. We were able to survive because we worked together. And Hori argues that as a species, we're losing that habit of collective action. He says, we're the first humans in history to disband the tribe. But here's the thing, we need a tribe. We all need a tribe. And that tribe is not our hundreds of friends on Facebook, and it's not our followers on Instagram. Our tribe is the people with whom we have a shared experience. And this shared experience doesn't have to be athletics. It can be through the arts. It can be through the theater. It can be through volunteering or parenting or your neighborhood or through your kid's school or through your job. It doesn't matter where it is. But finding your tribe isn't easy. Not everyone is an extrovert. Not everyone is an organizer, but you have to work at it. But if you believe, as I do, that everyone wants to be part of something bigger than themselves, you'll find that people are willing to jump in. You just have to invite them in. You have to welcome them into your boathouse. You have to open the door and say, hey, you belong here. When we think about launching this new initiative that's going to start taking place, we're going to launch it February 1st, called Amelia's Army, which is to bring women new to triathlon into the sport. I think about this idea of the sandbox. Remember in preschool, the sandbox? It's fun to play in the sandbox by yourself, but it was a lot more fun when there were other kids in the sandbox, even though it meant you had to share the digger and the dump truck and the spade and the bucket. It was still more fun to have other kids in the sandbox. So you want to welcome people into your sandbox. Okay, here's point number 2 on Build Your Boathouse. We know that training together makes you faster. As a rower, I innately know this, but I think this is true across all sports. When you put together an unconditionally supportive group with individuals striving towards a common goal, everybody's going to get faster. So in 2017, after the World Championships, I came back to Portland and I knew I wanted to build my triathlon boathouse. And so I sought out the women in the Portland area who were fast triathletes, and we started the Bat Women. The Bat Women was a name given to us by our male counterparts. It stands for Badass Triathlon Women. And what we found is over time that all of the women in this group got faster. Now, at the same time that we were starting this, Shalane Flanagan, who's also trained here in Oregon, won the New York City Marathon. She was the first American to win the New York City Marathon in decades. And the New York Times started to talk about Shalane, and they looked into the fact that she had brought along this group of women at the training center at Nike. And of the 11 women who trained with her the preceding 2 or 3 years, all 11 of them made the Olympic team. Because at the same time that Shalane was mentoring and bringing these women along by being the sort of most experienced athlete in the group, they were making her faster. Those 11 women made their Olympic teams, but Shalane won the New York City Marathon. Everybody rises, everybody gets faster. Rising tide raises all boats. And the thing is, nobody's sacrificing for the group. Everybody's getting faster. Everybody's getting better and stronger and more confident. And the ripple effect of this is huge. In triathlon, at a master swim practice, when you have a faster swimmer swim down a couple lanes, even for a short set, even if they're pulling the slower athletes in that lane through 4x100 or 10x50 or something like that, those swimmers are not only totally inspired by having that faster swimmer in their lane, but we're actually swimming faster because we're in our draft. So now we believe that we can swim faster. One of the bat women early on in the formation of the group, this amazing triathlete, wrote me a note after about 6 months of all of us training together. And she said, Juliet, I used to think of myself as just an age grouper. I thought, if I could stand on an age group podium, maybe top step, maybe second step, that was pretty good. But now I think of myself in terms of an overall winner. I want to go and win the race overall. And that was exactly what we were hoping for. That type of confidence and belief in their training and belief in the group and bringing her along. And that same woman qualified for the World Championships in Kona and went on to the World Championships and ran the gutsiest race I've ever seen, came back from 246th out of the water, biked and ran her way into 10th over a 10-hour race, finished 10th by 5 seconds, which puts her on the podium, which wins her pro card, because she believed and she knew that she was a stronger athlete than she had 2 years earlier. And that's the power of training together. And again, this isn't limited to sports. This works in any tribe, because working together towards a focused goal makes everybody stronger, smarter, more efficient, and better at what they do. All right, here's point number 3 about building your boathouse. I want to talk about swing. So imagine a boat with 8 individuals, different bodies, different agendas, attitudes, personalities. They train together for months, first as individuals, competing for a spot in the best boat they can make, and then searching together for speed in one 60-foot boat, a 200-pound boat filled with 1,400 pounds of women, making that hydrodynamic vessel that just sits inches above the water fly. And you work at it and you work at it. And then there comes this moment where all 8 blades lock on at exactly the same time, accelerate through the water with exactly the same velocity, exit the water at the same time. Blades don't touch, and we do it again. And we do it again. And everybody kind of holds their breath because the boat is flying. It's like magic. And the coxswain is kind of quiet. And everybody wants to hold on to that moment forever. That's swing. But here's the thing. It's not just the physical emotion of the boat moving through the water. It's a moment where you feel completely emotionally bonded to the people around you. And it's that shared experience when those 9 people give everything they can. You would do anything for the woman in front of you. The woman behind you would do anything for you. So this feeling of swing transcends the physical and is much more emotional. So in this wonderful book called Boys in the Boat, which talks about this scrappy group of University of Washington rowers in the 1930s that went over to the 1936 Olympics and raced against Hitler's German crews, essentially, at a time when Germany was absolutely determined to show that they were the superior race. And they won. Scrappy group of Depression-era college kids. And one of the athletes, a guy named Joe Rance, in that boat describes the final race, and they were lucky enough to find swing in that race. And here's his description of it. This is a direct quote from the book. Joe had to trust absolutely without reservation that he and the boy in front of him and the boys behind him would all do precisely what they needed to do at precisely the instant they needed to do it. He had known in that instant that there could be no hesitation, no shred of indecision. He had no choice but to throw himself into each stroke as if he were throwing himself off of a cliff into a void, with unquestioned faith that the others would be there to save him. That's what swing feels like. But this doesn't only exist in rowing. I think it exists in all sports. In the heady days of the Boston Celtics, Bill Russell talked about you didn't have to look before you passed. You knew your teammate was going to be there for you. I think rowers and other athletes who've experienced this magic of swing, some people call it flow, some people call it being in the zone, go through life trying to recreate that. And I think we can. At our team event, we have a team event in Hood River every year for the Batwomen and all of our extended community. It's a very long day of training. We train, it's a day close to the summer solstice. So we train from the moment the sun comes up to when the sun goes down. So it's a long day. And I remember we were riding up to Lost Lake. We're about 80 miles into a 100-mile ride. People are beginning to feel really tired. The group had splintered a little bit. And I was riding up with four women, total of 4 women. 2 of them were feeling pretty strong, and 2 of the women were falling apart a little bit. And it was just this quiet, seamless, nobody spoke, nobody said anything, but pretty soon the 2 stronger riders were on either side of the 2 riders who were feeling really challenged. And the 4 of us just rode along this forest access road, climbing, climbing, climbing. And the stronger riders were buoying the weaker riders, and the weaker riders were pulling strength from those. That was swing. I felt it in that moment. There was no place on earth I'd rather be than with those 3 other women on that climb in that moment. It feels like you're in this bubble of effort and camaraderie that could last forever. So how does this work in real life? How do you find those boathouses? How do you create those boathouses? Well, as we navigate our way through the different chapters of our life, you're going to have different boathouses. You're going to have to create and recreate them time after time after time. When you're a young mother, it can be so solitary. For all those parenting books out there, there's no real guidebook. And particularly if you have a challenging kid, you better know who the other preschool parents are. You better know who the other middle school parents are, and you better have a team, a secret service team of high school parents who are helping you as you're helping them understand what's really going on with your 15 to 18-year-old kid. When we were in Amsterdam, I used to joke that I had my 3 boathouses. I had my drinking friends, and I had my thinking friends, and then I had the rowers. And within each one of these groups, we had this shared experience of that expat life, which again can be kind of weird and kind of isolating. And then I had the rowers as well, through which I got a whole insight, which I never would have gotten otherwise, being an American living in the Netherlands. But you have to create these different communities, and you have to give to them as much as they give back to you. When I came back from 2017, I absolutely knew I wanted to build my triathlon boathouse in Oregon. And so the Batwomen were born. And until COVID, we saw some pretty remarkable results. We trained together very regularly. We saw PRs smashed, pro cards won, but most important was the doubling and tripling and quadrupling of this community. And now it's become this sort of unconditionally supportive tribe in an otherwise solitary sport. And now we're thinking, we're planning to bring this idea of the Batwomen to women globally. Sort of a Batwomen for the every woman through this initiative I've referred to a couple times called the Amelia's Army. During COVID-19, this is harder than ever, but more important than ever. People are isolated. There's really little organic opportunity for social discourse. And at Life Sport, the company where I coach triathlon, we've been really focusing on this since February, trying to create community and offer support to athletes in an already singular sport. So as we navigate through different chapters, taking what the world throws at us, going from high school to college athlete, to young mother, to professional, to older and older, we need to create those boathouses. Okay. Third lesson, third golden rule. If you get lemons, make lemonade, or even better, make lemon drop martinis. Athletic competition is notorious for doling out tough lessons. I remember in 1987 at the World Championships, the World Rowing Championships in Copenhagen, On finals day, the wind favored lanes 5 and 6. If you were in lanes 5 or 6, you came in first or second all day long. If you were in lanes 1 or 2, you came in fifth or sixth all day long, without question, without exception. And so we were in lane 2. We came in fifth. And I remember after that race at age 20 being so angry. This wasn't just, this wasn't fair. We were better than that. We got robbed. And my dad would come over. He was working in England at the time. He came over to Copenhagen for the race. And he looked at me and he said, if you're going to be a world-class athlete, you better start behaving like one. You compete in an outdoor sport. You have to be prepared for whatever comes your way. And I can remember him saying that like it was yesterday, even though it was 30 years ago. And he was right. In 1988 was the last Eastern Bloc Olympics. The Berlin Wall came down in 1990, and that changed the face of Eastern European athletics forever. In the sport of rowing, and women's rowing in particular, the use of anabolic steroids was unquestioned. Everybody knew that the Eastern Bloc athletes were using it. It was almost like a joke. The East German women won every single rowing event at the 1988 Olympics. I used to be able to whistle the East German national anthem. And we all knew this. Was this unfair? Absolutely. But that was the way the world worked at the time, and it wasn't worth burning energy over. In our sport of triathlon, things happen all the time in races. The swim is canceled, so you have to completely change your race day tactics. You get flat tires, you get injured. You get drafting penalties. You get other types of penalties. You drop a water bottle on the course. You get a penalty for littering. There's bad weather. There's probably doping. We don't know. There's people who cheat on the course. There's a zillion things that can go wrong over the course of a race, of a 1 hour race, of a 5 hour race, of a 10 hour race, of a 17 hour race. A lot of things can go wrong. And those are just the race day events. Training can dole out everyday humilities. They can hand out challenges on a silver platter. But if you ride that roller coaster, you probably won't last very long in the sport, and you certainly are not going to enjoy the process. So when sports throws you lemons, how do you make lemonade? Well, here's what I've figured out. Rule number 1, give yourself 24 hours and then move on. Rage at the sky, use all those 4-letter words, throw things around, preferably in private. But be pissed off for 24 hours. That's fine. But then the next day, move on. It's okay to beat yourself up, but only if you have a plan for improvement. So figure out what you need to do better. And you need to get forensic. Identify what went right as well as what went wrong. Find the silver lining. And you have to be aggressive about this because it's really easy for us to only focus on what went wrong. But that's never the case. There's always some things that went right. But you have to identify those and articulate those and focus on those at the same time that you're trying to solve the problems to make yourself a better athlete the next time. You have to be your own coxswain. You have to be your own coach. See that little person in the picture? She weighs 92 pounds, but all of those bigger, stronger women are hanging on her every word. You know why? Because she has looked into our very souls. Remember my earlier description of what it feels like in a 6-minute rowing race, how you're just blowing up and how the only sense that is working at the end of the race is your sense of hearing? That's because we're hanging on what that coxswain is saying. And the good coxswains will carefully study their athletes. I remember back on the Olympic team, there's a coxswain named Kim Santiago, and she had, before the days of computer files and your phone and everything else, she had an index box, plastic box of index cards. And every athlete had an index card. And as she got to know us over training, she would write down on that index card something about us that she could pull out at the end of the race. When we simply couldn't do anything else, we simply couldn't reach any further. And she would find something to say to us, to call on us, to ring out just a little bit more. But life isn't going to give you coxswains like Kim Santiago. You have to learn to be your own. You have to learn to be your own cheerleader. You have to learn to be your own coach. You have to have your own box of index cards with reminders on it to tell you what to do when the chips are down. Okay, here's the last solution that I have when things go bad, when life hands you lemons. Remind yourself that you have a choice. None of us are going to win. None of us are going to pay our mortgage on our triathlon winnings or our rowing winnings or probably any winnings from any athletic endeavor. At my local races, I get a growler of beer and a loaf of bread from the local bakery, if I'm lucky. Triathlon is a fantastic hobby. It's an intense, focused, competitive, time-consuming, wonderful, delicious hobby. But all of us have the resources and the intelligence to choose to do something else and to do it well. So when you're feeling down because you've gotten a raw deal in a race or in any part of life, maybe it's a relationship with somebody. Maybe it's your job. Maybe it's where you live. Maybe it's the friends you've chosen to hang out with. Maybe it's your marriage. Take a minute and peel back to see how life looks like without that thing. And then take power in the fact when you choose to put it back. You choose what you want to do. Okay, so how do we apply this one to life? Let me tell you a little bit about the year before COVID started. So starting around the end of 2018, I had a season-ending injury that no one could really solve. We couldn't figure it out. So every doctor, every PT, every acupuncturist, massage therapist in the book couldn't figure out how to make myself feel better. I was laid off. My husband was laid off. Then my husband found a job, but within 3 months left it because he hated it. My extended family was just really struggling. And these are people who I love more than anybody else in the world. My two nieces were struggling with mental illness. My father was showing early signs of memory loss. My brother was out of work for a year. My son had a terrible year, senior year in high school. So all of these people who were the most important people in the world to me were really having a hard time, and the weight of that was tough. And then after 3 years of pretty hellish symptoms, I was diagnosed with cancer and had to have an operation. For financial reasons, we need to sell our family home on the lake back in New Hampshire. Just as I rebounded from cancer, an Achilles injury took triathlon off the table for a year. In the midst of all of this, someone broke into our house in Portland and stole every single piece of jewelry that I owned. And then menopause hit me like a ton of bricks. No one told me about this piece, people. 4 months of never sleeping more than 45 minutes at a time because I had hot flashes on the hour, every night. And then right as all of that was sorting itself out, COVID-19 hits. And we know the financial and emotional impact, both personally and globally, that this pandemic has caused. So life has tossed a lot of lemons in the last 2.5 years, but we've all had chapters like this. So what do? Well, I would apply the same rules. Allow yourself to be disappointed for 24 hours. Have a good cry about it. All that jewelry gone, all my favorite things, my Olympic team watch, my mother's engagement ring. I cried. That was tough, but they're gone. So move on. So allow yourself to be pissed off, rage at the moon, call your sister and tell her how unjust life is, and then move on. Get forensic. Find the silver lining. So all of those injuries, first the hip, then the Achilles, cancer thrown in the middle, meant that I had to be out of running. But being out of running for so long, 18 months, meant that I saw power numbers on the bike that I'd never seen before. It meant that I did stage races and a cross Utah bike race with teammates that I never would have done otherwise. It meant focusing on different types of races that didn't involve running, which I went after and won. Cancer made me look at my current job and decide that, you know what, life was too short to do something that I was kind of semi-enthusiastic about. And it was too short to wait to jump into coaching full time, which is what I really wanted to do and should have done years before. My husband being laid off meant that he went back to startups, which is really where his heart lies. Even the jewelry robbery has a silver lining. With both my husband and myself at startups, with 2 boys in college, we probably need the insurance money more than I needed the jewelry. And even COVID in its own twisted way has been amazing. It's pushed me to learn 7 new technologies. It's forced me to innovate my program offerings. It's inspired me to jump to a new coaching company. And it's brought me closer than ever to my athletes because I'm in touch with them a lot more often than I used to be. Again, I have a choice. Remember, you have a choice. I don't have to race. I can go back and get a corporate job, earn more money, but I choose to be living this life right now with all of its lemons. So here are the final thoughts. I want to get back to this idea of swing in rowing. As individuals who've achieved wonderful things, both in sport and everywhere in life, we're always looking to achieve that perfect race. We want to find that swing and we want it to last forever. And I am chief among these. But I'll tell you, over all of these years, I've only had 2 perfect races in my whole life. And that may be all I get. And they were wonderful. But even though I know it's elusive, I'll continue to chase that ideal. I'll keep on dreaming big and looking for swing in training and racing and work and life. I'll keep on building my boathouse by fostering community and dragging others along with me. And I'll aggressively seek the silver lining every time life serves me up lemons, because I know that they're there to teach me something and to make me better. So those are my final thoughts. Thanks so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, you can always feel free to reach out and find me at Juliet@lifesportcoaching.com. Thanks for joining me, everybody.